And we're going to start with a moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance led by Ms. Owen.
Please stand for a moment of silence. Face the flag for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the Board of Education quarterly work session. As you may have noticed, Board Chair Susan Horn is participating electronically tonight, so I'll be chairing the meeting. Just a reminder that our next work session will be held Wednesday, November 4th, with the regular session to follow on Wednesday, November 11th. Both meetings will be held in this boardroom starting at 5 p.m. We have been notified that the representatives from Millsaps Gowan Government Relations are unfortunately stuck in some traffic. So following the superintendent's report, we may need to take a small break, or we might change and do teacher evaluations. We're just going to evaluate the time. So be patient with us if we do take a small break. Thank you. Now, do I have an approval of the agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so moved by Mr. McMillan and seconded by Mr. Watson. Now we're going to have a vision mission spotlight by Mr. Watson.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to do this. For me, just the way I've kind of grown to learn to live life is to try to center mission in any space that I'm at. And so I really appreciate and value the opportunity to kind of reflect a little bit on the KCS mission. So I really want to emphasize that. So our mission at Knox County Schools is to provide excellent and accessible learning opportunities to empower all students to realize their full potential. And as I continue to dig in that and think about the specific words, one of the things that's really stuck on me is the idea of all students. And as a school board that's elected to represent specific districts, we also know that we're all elected to represent Knox County Schools as a whole. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is get around to some other schools and just see some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that are happening there. This month, I've gotten to go to Spring Hill Elementary, Chilhowie Intermediate, Holston Middle, Austin East, and also today visited Emerald Academy. And one of the things that I saw just going around to those 5 schools is, one, how much our teachers are working so incredibly hard to provide accessible opportunities right now. Learning back in March, the door got shut on that for a period of time, right? I mean, it kind of slammed shut for so many of our kids. And one of the things that I've seen our district doing and seen our teachers doing and our administrators doing over these last few months is really trying to get that door open again. And so I was really encouraged and saw some of the innovation that's happening. But one of the things that I really wanted to expound on was some conversations that I had over at Austin East. So I had not had a lot of experience at the school there, but when I was meeting with Nathan there, the principal, one of the things that he was reflecting on is that some of the students there, when asked what AE means, is they've been told from others that it means almost educated. And I thought, man, that is sad. And Nathan started spending the next 2 hours telling me about all the strategies that he's employing to change that narrative to academic excellence, to really flip the script on that. And one of the things I was really internalizing around our mission statement is that we cannot begin to provide excellent and accessible opportunities unless each individual student knows that they're worth it, that they can. And to me, I take that as a personal challenge because I think it starts with all of us who care about public education, is that we have to set the tone to help our students and our parents know that we believe in them, that we believe they can excel, maybe when a lot of others have told them that they can't. And so that's what I saw a lot in the teachers and the administrators as I went around to those schools, is people day in, day out in really small ways and really big ways telling kids that, yes, you can and we believe in you. And so I'm encouraged by that, but also know that there's a heavy weight on me as a school board member to also bear that burden to help students and parents know that, yeah, we do believe in you, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that that door is wide open and no longer shut for some students. So.
Thank you, Mr. Watson, for reminding us why we're all doing this. And I kind of rushed through things. On approval of the agenda, we had a motion and a second, but we also need to vote on the agenda. So all ayes for approval of the agenda? Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, the agenda's approved.
So if it wasn't approved, did I have to retract my whole thing?
You got to go again now.
Okay. All right.
This is what happens when you have a substitute person in the chair seat tonight. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Thomas for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. First of all, before I give my report, an important announcement. First, let me start by announcing that Knox County Schools will be going on a 2-hour delay tomorrow. This decision was made based on the weather forecast calling for the potential for flooding with the heaviest rainfall between 4 a.m. and 9 a.m. Buses will also be running 2 hours late. I would like to clarify that this is a delay. Students are not expected to log on to their Chromebooks during the 2-hour delay, so tomorrow is not a red day at this point. It is a delay, and a 2-hour delay to give our bus drivers opportunity with daylight to occur so that we can see if there's standing water, also to kind of monitor the situation during the period between 4 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning. So again, we'll be getting that information out to parents pretty much as we are speaking. Now for superintendent's report. On Monday, we sent an important email to families with information about changing their students' learning model for the spring semester, which begins on January 5th. Families who want to change their learning model from virtual to in-person instruction or from in-person to virtual instruction must fill out an enrollment form by 3:30 p.m. on Friday, November the 6th, and have that turned in to us or to their school. The email sent on Monday includes a link to the enrollment form, and we've simplified the process over what it was back in the summer. So I think folks will find that it's really a really simple process and should not have as much trouble maybe as we experienced back in the summer. Families who are unable to fill out the online form can get a paper copy at their school or a printable form on our website, www.knoxschools.org/connect. And paper forms are available in 6 different languages. Families that have multiple children in Knox County schools should complete the form for each student. So again, let me say that if you've got multiple children in our school system, complete the form for each student who will change their learning model. Also, please keep in mind that families who are happy with their current learning model do not need to take any action. Again, if you're happy with the learning model and platform that you're in right now, you do not need to take any action at all. As a district, we recognize that the virtual learning program has been an important option for families who are concerned about COVID-19 or who have specific health-related risk factors. And let me just say, and Mr. Watson alluded to it too, that our teachers are working extremely hard, and administrators and our school staff. It's more than just teachers and administrators. And let me also say that the virtual platform with our teachers, they're doing an outstanding job with the virtual learning program. So I don't want anything that I say to be taken like I am not supporting the virtual learning platform, nor do I not recognize how hard folks are working. So again, I just feel like I need to provide families with all the information so that they can make the very best decision that they can possibly make for their child or their children. And over the last several weeks, we found that the students who have the greatest success in the virtual program are those who benefit from a strong support structure at home, and also who are highly disciplined and self-motivated. So again, the virtual program is working very well, but and our teachers are doing a great job, but it also takes the students on the other end doing their part, making sure they log in, making sure they do the assignments, turn in assignments, and things of that nature. A couple of few other things to consider for in-person learning, and may help make a decision that in-person learning lends itself to promoting collaborative learning for students, enhancing critical thinking skills, developing social skills, also building organizational skills, Also, students maybe are a little bit more motivated by the physical presence of a teacher in the classroom. Also, the teacher, it's a little easier for the teacher to address the different learning styles for students. Also, students are able to develop conflict resolving skills, presentation skills, and learning to work with students and teachers from different cultural backgrounds. And again, that I'm not saying that cannot happen in the virtual program, because it does. But again, just for your particular situation, if you're a parent and you know your student, how they learn best, and just to make that a consideration. Additionally, we looked at grades at the 4.5 week mark of our 9-week period. The percentage of Fs in the virtual learning program were twice that of those in person. Again, that was the 4.5 week mark. We will look, the 9 weeks is over, I think it is, so, and report cards go out this week. So I'm hopeful that when we look at it, that we'll see a drastically different picture at the end of 9 weeks. I realize that some of this may be attributed to the fact that that it's new, the virtual learning program, and folks getting more accustomed to that style. So I just encourage our families to keep in mind all these factors. But please, please, please know that I recognize that this is a family decision, and I respect that. And I do want to reiterate that our teachers who teach in our virtual learning program are doing an excellent job, and that the virtual learning program is here to stay. So don't want anything that I say to be taken the wrong way, that I am pressuring folks to do in-person learning. But, I want for you and your child, we want to provide the very, very best educational opportunities that we can provide, no matter whether that's in the virtual learning program or the in-person program. So just keep these things in mind as you make your decision. Also, if your child is not currently enrolled in Knox County and you're considering a return to Knox County schools in the spring semester, please know that we welcome your return to our in-person learning platform or virtual learning platform. So again, if you're not currently in Knox County schools, but you're thinking about coming back, we want to encourage you to do so, and we will welcome you back. Also want to let our families know that we will be sending an email in November with information about their current Chromebook insurance status and the deadline to purchase insurance. However, remember that we do not make phone calls asking for insurance payments. So if you get a phone call that's saying that it's Knox County Schools and it's about your insurance or insurance purchase, just know that's not us. Okay, we're not going to do that. So please don't respond to that. The payments should be made at your student school or on our website, but never over the phone. Madam Chair, members of the board, this concludes my report for this evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I ask you one question, Mr. Thomas? Tomorrow with the delay, that's for virtual and in-person students both, the delay?
Yes,
Okay.
That would be.
So even the virtual students will have the 2-hour delay?
Right.
I just wanted to make sure that was clarified. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and switch the order of our agenda, if that's okay with everyone, and start with Mr. Bolton talking about the teacher evaluations. And hopefully our other guests will get here soon. I know all know with the rain and roads that probably the traffic's not great right now coming from Nashville. I want to thank Mr. Bolton for coming and talking about teacher evaluations. I know there's a lot of questions around them, and I think he's going to help try to clarify it and answer some questions for us concerning what's going on this year.
Thank you, Ms. Vice Chair and board members. Thank you for this opportunity to kind of talk about certified evaluations. The purpose that I want to talk to you about is to make sure there's a little more clarity around evaluations, and in doing so, I kind of want to talk about where the basis for evaluation is rooted. And I know there's probably, I'm sure you have filled some calls from maybe some teachers requesting board action to be done in terms of evaluation. So I wanted to kind of take a moment to talk about the full process of evaluations. Evaluations are rooted in state statute. They're also rooted in the state board regulations. And so in this presentation, I want to take a moment just to talk about that, walk through those things, talk about the most recent governor's recommendation that was made on October the 16th, and then kind of give you an idea of the next steps in terms of certified evaluation. So Tennessee Code Annotated, the evaluation model is a result of the General Assembly. There is state statute that sets measures in the General Assembly. Even it goes as far as prescribing that 50% of the overall level of effectiveness, or 50%, is to be weighted towards the observed model or observations, and 50% is to be weighted towards student evaluation or from student evaluation. And that's written in 49.1.302. I've got that citation on the board, and I know there's a lot of information there, but it specifically talks about those weighted models. So it's rooted in state statute. It's also rooted in state board policy. State board policy basically restates in state board policy that particular citation in the Tennessee Code Annotated. And in it states that the 50% of the evaluation criteria will be comprised of student achievement data. The other 50% is comprised of evaluation data. So the reason why I say that is because that action that is implemented in terms of the evaluation of teachers does not take place at the local level. There's not much that local boards of ed can do to exempt teachers from evaluation, irregardless of the circumstances around. That has to go through General Assembly and through the State Board of Ed. And so when we talk about it, what makes a lot of teachers confused is that on October the 16th, the governor announced that he would like to see action taken to detach students or the teacher evaluations from student achievement data. So to say that, he encouraged the General Assembly to take action to remove that 50% student achievement data component from the team evaluation model. Okay? So he simply stated that he encourages the state legislature because not even the governor has the power to overrule what is in state statute. So therefore, he implored the General Assembly to take that action. And I want something, because there's been some misinformation that's out there, I want all teachers to know that the governor did not make any recommendations in regards to the observation component of the evaluation process. I know that's been some discussion and that's been out there, but the governor, as I read the statement, there is no mention about that observation component, which, as is right now, makes up about 50% of the overall evaluation process. And so, again, no action has been taken. So another miscommunication, and we had to send out an information today for folks to choose how they were going to accept their growth models based on student achievement evaluation, because we were compelled to do so because that's current state law. So when Clint Sadler sent that out on our behalf, he actually put that in the narrative that, I understand to try to make that a little more understanding, because it can be quite confusing. So again, observations will be as they are in the past, and as of right now, there has been no action from the General Assembly. The General Assembly will not reconvene until January. So the earliest any action that can be taken in regards to the recommendation by the governor is not until January. And again, the governor is just recommending that the student achievement component of the evaluation process is removed. So stay tuned. That will also take action from the State Board of Ed. Likely just exactly like the emergency provision that went through this past spring as a result of the pandemic. The state legislature took it up, action was taken, and emergency action was taken by the State Board. So what are our next steps? Like I mentioned earlier, we had to send out an email asking for teachers to make selections based on student achievement data because that's what was provided on the October 15th release of the team evaluation calendar. We've also sent out resources for in-person and virtual instruction to try to bridge the gap. I had supplemental materials because understanding that virtual instruction looks a little different than in-person instruction. And so this information was provided, and it was provided in an email that was sent from Mr. Thomas to all certified staff. And I would encourage folks that may have not received that, check your clutter, because sometimes things that go to our clutter box are things that are sent on broad email. So just be mindful of that. We've also continued to update that information on our education, our team evaluation resource link that is on our page, so that teachers can have real-time access to any kind of changes that come down the pipeline when it comes to evaluation changes. And then per the Tennessee Department of Ed, observations will continue as normal because there's no action that has been taken to change that. And if the governor's actions that he recommended were taken, then observations will still continue as normal. It's just the 50% component will be taken out that was tied to student evaluation. And so we have tried to, we realize this is going to be maybe a sore spot, maybe an area of contention with our teachers, because we realize and we recognize the trials and the struggles, and we appreciate the hard work that they've done, and they continue to do. But we have consistently published this message throughout that there has not been no change to the evaluation model. And so we also have some additional resources that we can supplement at any time that, that we need to. And that's basically all I've got, unless you all have any questions. I'd be happy to answer those.
I have a question, Mr.
Sure.
Bolton. For teachers, and I think it's probably more in high school, that are teaching both virtually and in-person classes, are there observations, could their observations end up being just during the virtual classes, or is there, how is that working? Because I could see some teachers, obviously teachers are much more used to teaching in person and would probably rather be evaluated on that, I would think, but I just didn't know how that's working, especially at like the high school level.
It really, those measures are set up in that pre-conference before the school, before the evaluations begin, and setting those things up. And so I think that conversation can be had. When we talk about announced evaluations, there is an expectation that the principal can announce that evaluation that is occurring at this point in time. I'll have to look into that for the details to see how that we're handling those folks that are teaching in person and virtual. But I would assume that it's handled similarly to those that are teaching fully in person. But that's a great question.
Okay. Mr. Watson?
So I know we're kind of building the plane as we're flying it. But has there been any work done yet to adjust the rubric slightly for teachers that are teaching virtually? Because my guess is what is making good instruction virtual instruction is a little bit different than in classrooms. So as a way to help teachers actually improve and get better through that evaluation, has there been any thought to looking at that rubric? And
yes, well, here's where you get into some issues. Yeah. The official documents that we use have to go through the State Board of Ed for approval. Sure. So our team rubric has gone through that process and it has been approved. Now, when we're looking at that specific team rubric, the State Department has provided some resources to supplement so that it provides some additional definition, or what does this actually look like in terms of in the virtual environment, what does this particular thing look like? And so we have provided those resources. So I know that's a roundabout way to say that the State Board has not necessarily taken action to implement those guidelines into the official documents. They have provided them as a secondary resource.
Okay. Second question. So as a rookie board member, I'm not really up to date yet on all the evaluation process in terms of timing. Might it be possible that the removal of the student achievement data actually happens retroactively? Would there be a chance that data gets into the evaluation, but then because of legislative action, that actually gets removed from the final evaluation.
That's a good point. I think typically in the sequence of when your evaluations will roll over in terms of the timing, typically we have an embargo on test data until sometime at the end of August.
Okay.
And so essentially your overall what we call level of LOE for a teacher, which is that 50% observation, that 50% student achievement, is not set in stone until sometime at the end of August.
Yep.
So that could happen, but I think that they'll likely take action
Sure.
pretty early on that.
Are there other questions for Mr. Bolton? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we are still waiting for our guests to arrive in traffic. We've heard from them, and we're thinking in probably about another 15 minutes. So why don't we take a recess till 5:45? Thank you. I'm going to call the meeting back to order. We really appreciate Elizabeth Millsaps and Robert Gowan of Millsaps Gowan Government Relations. They're the lobbyists representing the Coalition of Large School Systems, otherwise known as CLASS. And I know that they have had a treacherous way of getting here from Nashville, and we really appreciate them coming on one of the worst weather nights to talk to us. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us. We're glad to be here, even though it took us 5 hours to get here. We're not going to be compelled to keep you any longer than we have to. But just real quickly, as we do every year, we want to give you a little bit of background on CLASS. It's a coalition of the 4 biggest, but now we have to say the 4 largest urban school systems, because Hamilton County is no longer the 4th largest. It's Rutherford County. It's and Williamson County may be about to jump over Hamilton County as well. But the 4 largest urban school systems make up CLASS. And as we say every year when we come to Knoxville, it was established here in Knoxville. Mayor Ragsdale suggested that the Big 4 get together to lobby to change the BEP, which was done the next year in 2007, and that did benefit Hamilton and Knox County. And we represent, unlike TOS and TSBA, we represent both the administration and school board members, so we communicate with both sides.
And we'll add that in addition to TOS and TSBA representing every issue that is important to public education, we watch those issues, but Robert and I focus on issues that CLASS unanimously agrees are urban priorities so that we can really target those specific issues, because sometimes those needs are different for urban schools versus rural schools, and that's what we tend to focus on in addition to our partnership with TOS and TSBA.
And just a couple of examples of things that we are a lot more interested in than the smaller school districts are right now. One's charter schools, obviously. Those are all just in the Big 4. There aren't any outside of the Big 4 urban systems. ELL is another, funding of ELL students and other ELL issues is another issue that has for a long time been a concern of the Big 4 districts, but now that has over time become a bigger issue for 4 smaller districts. You want to take that?
2020 brought a number of changes early in our legislative session. Back in January, about 15 years ago, if you guys have remembered that far back, we had a new Speaker of the House, Speaker Sexton, who we found to be very open and interested in supporting public schools, which was a good change for us. There was a slightly smaller House committee schedule. Instead of having 4 subcommittees, there were only 3 committees that rolled up into the full committee, which meant that every legislator had a few more bills that they were looking at, but made us able to better kind of focus our energy on 3 groups instead of 4, which was great. There were over 3,000 pieces of legislation filed and almost 600 bills that related to K through 12 education. So when you guys get feedback from your constituents or the public about why you have a lobbyist, it's because there are 600 bills that are related to K through 12 education, and you guys have your responsibilities as board members and as staff members, plus most of you have other jobs outside of this. So Robert and I are happy that we get the opportunity to read through that and help you really focus your energy on the highest priority issues that come up each year. This year we anticipate another change as the long-serving chair of Senate Education, Senator Dolores Gresham, is retiring and will be replaced. We think that there's some jockeying amongst Senate leadership to determine after the election this year who will be the right person to serve as her replacement, that it depends on how the leadership structure changes within the caucus and with leadership positions in other committees. So there are several people that are interested in that, and we'll be watching and working with that new chairperson to make sure they understand all of your needs.
I want to talk about the budget. As you know, this is one of the most unusual legislative sessions that the General Assembly's ever had because of the COVID situation. We usually have a pretty good list of new spending in K-12 on this slide, but this year the only new spending was about $50 million that was put in the budget for BEP growth, and that is for additional students, increase in some of the BEP components. But that's all that ended up in the final budget. There were two budgets that were passed. There was a no growth budget that was passed in March that cut a substantial amount from K-12. And then there was another budget that when the legislature came back in June, the $50 million for BEP growth was the only thing that was left. There was originally in the no growth budget about $51 million for teacher salaries that was eliminated. But as you can see there, when they came back in, I guess it was March, when they cut in March, they cut over 24 line items that were K-12 line items. And that, you can see the amounts there. That was $265 million that had planned to be spent on K-12 recurring, and another 120 in non-recurring. And just to finish up with the budget, this is the current situation. There's a state hiring and purchasing freeze. And I think most significantly for us, for the next couple of years, the state budget was balanced using non-recurring revenue. And so there's going to be a lot of pushback on any proposals for new spending. And the plan is that next year's budget will also have to be balanced with non-recurring revenue. And if not, it may be the third year. But the plan is definitely to balance the budget next year with non-recurring. Departments have been asked, and this includes the Department of Education, they've been asked to cut 12% from this year's budget. That doesn't mean those cuts are going to be made, but departments have been asked to identify those cuts in case revenue does take a turn downward. So overall, we showed you the K-12 spending that was cut. It was about $400 million that was cut in March from the original budget. And then when I came back in June, as you can see, about $285 million was cut. So all of that's to say the budget situation is, the picture that has been painted is dire. I will say that since in the first 2 months of the fiscal year, which started for Tennessee in August, there is about a $400 million surplus. And that surplus is over and above what the revenue that had been projected through the end of September. There is a $400 million surplus. And whether that trend is going to continue, we probably won't know until January, when Christmas spending and that type of thing are collected. But I say that to say the picture that was painted back in the spring was pretty dire. The revenue picture has not been as bad as what this budget is based on.
And as we look at bills that passed this year that were most impactful to your school systems, the first bills we've chosen to highlight are some tools that were COVID-19 specific. The first authorizes the State Board of Education to create emergency rules, which allows some flexibility for both your teachers and for your principals to look at access to classrooms. So your teachers may need to work virtually or in person. You may need some teachers to have some flexibility around certification so that you could fill some positions in the short term. And this gave the State Board of Education some flexibility around that. We feel like they have been as responsive as we could hope for as we look toward what we need to do in the transition spaces that we're in. So we're appreciative of their support and the work that they're doing there.
And then Public Chapter 792 is a caption bill that was by Senator Gresham and Representative Dunn that created a commission to study what COVID-19 is doing in our community, to look at both short and long-term changes for education. So if we need to reevaluate funding around technology or changing the 180-day requirement or some in-person requirements or some truancy rules, this commission has the authority to make some of those recommendations and look at that kind of from a 50,000-foot perspective and see what they can offer and support, which is a little different from the State Department, which is really looking at kind of every small detail and is tasked with dealing with those kind of minute details. This is sort of a big picture. How are we going to look at a long-term recovery strategy? So we know that they will be making recommendations in January, but anticipate that there may be some evolution of the recommendations that they make and the work that they do, just because of the reality of our circumstance and that COVID-19 is not winding down now. So we know this is something we're going to be dealing with long-term, so we anticipate more work from them.
We wanted to give you an update on the education savings account. The original budget funded implementation of education savings account program in Shelby County and Davidson County, and that would have cost about $38 million. That was finally eliminated in June after Chancery Court found that that was unconstitutional. Since June, that ruling in Davidson County Chancery Court was appealed to the Court of Appeals. They upheld, it was unanimous decision, said that that did violate the Home Rule Act. You can't pass a law that only applies to two counties. That has not been appealed as of this afternoon to the state Supreme Court. There was a statement from the governor's office when the Court of Appeals opinion came out that they would appeal. That appeal's due by tomorrow, 4 o'clock. We'll send a note to the class working group to let you know if that's done. If they don't appeal, then they can't continue with the program. Do you want to take this? I'm going to take it. All right, this next bill is one of the things that we've spent the most time on since session adjourned back in June. Public Chapter 576 by Senator Gresham and Representative White was a bill, was brought by the State Comptroller's Office, and in their presentation to the committees and on the floor, they, in response to questions that we had prompted, they said this would not impact the Big Four school systems. Let me tell you what the bill does. It requires a county legislative body to make revenue estimates and determine the level of revenue necessary to establish a budget for the operation of schools. Requires the director of school and chair Board of Education prepare a budget according to those revenue estimates made by the county legislative body. A couple of days before this was to go into effect, we got a call from Hamilton County, and they said, this applies to us. There's no way this does not apply to us. So we called the comptroller's office. They said, no, it only applies to, and I forget the funding act that you have to adopt, or your budgeting act. And none of our districts have adopted that state laws is the way you put your budget together. So this does apply to the Big Four school system. The response then was, well, this is just codifying current practice because the county commission already establishes the revenue, and that's true, but there's question when this would happen. And I'm not going to say a whole lot much more on this. I'm going to see if there are any questions about this. There's some, we have talked to your staff here about this, and we do have concerns for Knox County about some of the implications. The last conversation we've had with the comptroller's office was that they were going to come back with the cleanup bill to ask the legislature to do what they were trying to do, which was only making this apply to a handful of school districts, that they didn't feel like were following what this bill now lays out.
I guess, could you explain for me, what are the negative implications for the big school districts on this bill?
I'm going to tell you how generally how, I'll tell you what the comptroller's office told us was already happening, and this is not changing anything. The local school board goes to the county commission and says, we want $100 million for schools for the next year. The county commission either approves that or they don't. And that's where the comptroller's office says that the county commission has established the revenue. And where they say you're preparing a budget document, it's not the budget proposal that you are sending in April. It's the budget document that you are finally approving in June after you hopefully get approval from your funding body on what you're going to spend. Now, what we have learned, there are some districts, Shelby County and Hamilton County, are districts who the funding body essentially rely on them to tell them what revenue is available. And that's from property tax, from sales tax, from liquor sales. So what the comptroller thought was happening, and that situation also happens in the smaller districts that the comptroller is trying to address. They don't want the school boards to be determining, even on the front end, what the revenue is. They want those county commissions that they're trying, and it's Sullivan County, I don't know if you, there was a threat of a lawsuit over their funding last fall, but this is in response to something that happened in Sullivan County. And I guess this will be instructive exactly what did happen in Sullivan County. The school board was assuming Sullivan County is a school district whose student population is going down. And so they were assuming, I think the assumption was that they were going to lose 2% of their student population. So that would mean they were going to get 2% less in BEP based on student population. Well, the county commission, based on reports that we got when we have been working on this, the county commission said, we don't want to make that assumption of 2%. We want to make the assumption of 1% so we lose less money from the state. So in that case, it's not the school board saying this is how much property tax we're going to get, this is how much sales tax is coming in. It was the school board making a determination on how much state revenue they could get because of their assumption on student population. And so in that case, in addressing the Sullivan County situation, they would have to use the Sullivan County assumption on student population. And my guess is that when the comptroller comes back, they may make a change where it's a specific part of the assumption that the county commission makes. And but anyway, that's, like I said, this is something that we have been working with the comptroller's office pretty much since session adjourned.
So, Public Chapter 587 by Representative Johnson. Advance our slides. There you go. Creates a Grow Your Own program, which helps. Specifically, this started with an issue at Austin P to help them partner and develop an education, kind of a teacher prep program that benefits their communities. So this allows for LEAs to partner
with local higher education programs to recruit, train, and retain teachers. And this is obviously a brand new program that will take some time to unroll, but opportunities for communities to invest in teacher development programs are always a value. And then Public Chapter 717 requires, it shortens the time frame between when you make an offer to a teacher and that teacher has to respond and either accept or reject that offer. This actually came from an issue in Davidson County where there were a number of teachers who were kind of weighing job A versus job B and leaving that job offer sitting on the table for 30 or 60 days, which means that principal is not filling their building over the course of the summer like they're obligated and required to do. So this just gives you a little more flexibility to say to those teacher candidates, if you don't accept this job by this date, we're going to move on to another candidate, so that you have the ability to bring those teachers in as quickly as possible when you hire new folks. And then if we look at Public Chapter 629, it expands automatic license revocation, and there are a number of criminal actions that are actually not required for teachers to lose their license, and they are expansive: burglary, arson, statutory rape, child abuse, child endangerment, child neglect, assault, a number of felony convictions that for some strange reason are not included in automatic revocation. And the state board asks for the ability for the courts to notify the board if a teacher is convicted of particularly a violent crime. The state board wants to know as soon as possible and assume some of that responsibility for making sure that person is not in a classroom with someone else's children. Let's see here. And then Public Chapter 734 is a vehicle by which, if a school district enters into a lawsuit that is then deemed frivolous, there is an opportunity for the third party to recover some of those fees. And this was specifically targeted toward a situation in which a school district might sue the state for not funding, that this could potentially create a vehicle for the state to ask for those funds back. We know that your school districts are not going to enter into frivolous lawsuits, so it's not something that we feel a great deal of pressure around. And then Public Chapter 733, the last one on this slide, from Senator Gresham and Senator White, is again a response to an issue that happened in Metro Nashville. There are some privacy rules that don't allow, for example, you to release a video of something that happened with a teacher to the public, or if, say, you have a parent who is involved in an altercation with a school bus, if someone wants to see that video. This adds the State Board of Education to a list of authorities that have subpoena power to request that. So you are in no way under any concern of liability if there's an issue with a teacher license and the State Board requests that video and you give it to them. There was a question from an attorney in Metro as to whether or not you could technically release to them, and this just says that they have subpoena power to compel that video in the same way a court of law does. So it's a protection for your districts to make sure that you're doing exactly what is above board.
And real quickly, Public Chapter 532 requires the Department of Education to develop a question bank for formative assessments that school districts, that'll be made available to school districts. The next bill is a cleanup bill. The legislature's been grappling with alternative schools and alternative programs for the last 3 years. This does everything that you see in the first couple of sentences, but the main thing that we thought, the most important thing that it addressed, it gives the director of schools some discretion on zero tolerance. There was a bill that passed last year that was being interpreted to say that if a student had a zero tolerance offense, that they could not even be assigned to an alternative school or an alternative program. And there's big concern, particularly from Shelby County, that these kids were just been kicked out of school, left to their own devices, and that was a worse situation than whatever zero tolerance offense that they had committed.
And then the last bill that we've highlighted here by Senator Swan and Representative Farmer has to do with truancy. That there have been some back and forth discussions for years with the legislature on who is actually accountable and what authority that you have with truancy. And this is a vehicle to give some more accountability to parents for a legal obligation to compel their kids to come to school. Just to clarify that Representative Farmer felt like it was an important thing in your community. And Public Chapter 736 by Senator Yarborough and Representative Freeman, a surprise Democratic success at the end of legislative session last year, requires your family life education curriculum to include discussions of dating and domestic violence, just to encourage your students to be more aware of safety and consent.
And we want to spend the last couple of minutes talking about issues that we will be watching in the 2021 session. Obviously, the biggest issue that we will be responding to is the COVID response. And talk real quickly about BEP funding. There is the BEP Review Committee released their report this afternoon, and their top priority is holding districts harmless in regard to ADM. And there was some discussion on at the BEP Review Committee yesterday before they approved the report. When that showed up as a priority back in the summer, we thought that something that hopefully is not going to have a lot of pushback, but there was pushback yesterday in the BEP Review Committee, so that's not going to be a slam dunk. And the proposal specifically discussed yesterday that is going to be brought is that last year's ADM be used to determine your BEP calculation for next year. And there apparently are some districts that have had an increase this fall. Those districts would also be held harmless. If you've got an increase, they're going to use the higher number. So that will probably be one of the hottest topics in education. And there was no indication from the administration yesterday where they will fall on that. It'll be up to them to provide funding if districts are held harmless, or propose funding. And then we're always watching for what is included for teacher salaries. As we said earlier, there was no increase for teachers in this year's budget. There's not been an indication from the administration on this either, whether they're going to include additional money for salaries. They will, are they starting, we'll start budget hearings week after next.
November 9th.
But the last issue under BEP's definition of a teacher, there's been discussion and a couple of bills filed for the last couple of years by Senator Gardenhire from Hamilton County to define who a teacher is in regard to school funding. And his concern is that when the General Assembly approves money for teacher salaries, that money is not going to people who are in the classroom. And in the past, that's not had much traction. He's actually running he's up for re-election this year, and this is his big issue that he is running on in Hamilton County. So we think there could be, if he's re-elected, there could be more serious push for defining who a teacher is in terms of funding. And then there's always a threat on pre-K funding. There's not been any additional pre-K funding added to the budget since 2005, but there have been threats in the last 5 or 6 years to eliminate and move that money to K-12, so we'll be watching that.
An ongoing discussion that we engage in as a portfolio evaluation model. We'll continue to see
even though we know that our teachers should be held harmless this year, we think there will be continued discussions of evaluation and data, and we want to make sure that all of our needs are considered. We anticipate seeing another discussion of a statewide literacy initiative, which was a huge push of the Department of Education in 2020, and then sort of got waylaid by the reality of COVID, and got left on the table, so we anticipate that coming back. Required physical education, specifically for elementary school students, continues to be a concern and much more complicated to implement than we maybe ever anticipated. So we will continue those discussions. We feel like mental health services is something that will come up at the end of the pandemic as children have been home and they have been isolated. We anticipate the legislature looking at ways to evaluate funding and support necessary for dealing with some of those mental health issues that we will be facing. Perpetual issue is A through F grading for each of your school buildings. The previous Speaker of the House was very focused on that. That is not a priority for a number of other legislators. So we think there may be an opportunity to reevaluate that, especially in light of changes around standards and evaluation over the next year.
And then the last thing we usually have a meeting where we invite all school board members and staff. That's usually held during the TSBA meeting in Nashville. They're not having their meeting in person this year. So we'll be having a virtual meeting. We'll invite all board members and staff and that's where we start to have the discussion about ideas for legislation. We've already gotten a few from a couple of the other districts, but that's where we will start to talk about our planned strategy for 2021. And we encourage you, even before we have that meeting, to let us know if there are things that we need to be addressing. And we'd be glad to answer any questions. Again, appreciate you sticking around, and glad to answer any questions.
I have one question. Is there any, I know there's been some discussion about waiving TN-ready testing this year. Is there any discussion of that even
There's
coming
discuss. They're going to, the governor and commissioner have announced they're not going to use the data for evaluations and accountability. But right now their plan is to go forward with the testing. We think that there's going to be a serious legislative push to put that off for a lot of different reasons, not just COVID, but we think there's going to be a push from the legislature. The governor's made it clear he wants the testing to happen, but a lot of influential legislators are not on board with that.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just out of curiosity, I know it costs more every year. You can't take the same money that you operate, whether we're talking about this district or somewhere else. And I think what I'm about to ask you about applied to the local boards and the county commission. I think they referred to it as maintenance of effort.
Yes, sir.
Is that still around?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are required to spend no less than, the county commission is required to spend no less than what they had spent the year before.
Is it just no less? Or it seems to me, I used to be on the county commission, it seems to me like back then we talked in terms of that it had to be at least 10% above the previous year.
No, it's no less. It's no less.
Just
Yes.
whatever you spent last year.
Right.
That floor is solid.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? I want to thank y'all so much for coming and discussing all these issues with us.
Sure.
And I'm sure we'll look forward to having our class meeting. Is it in November that we're going to have it?
It'll
Or?
be toward the end of November.
Early December is when it usually is in conjunction with TSBA, but we'll send out a little online poll to look at some date opportunities with your staff to coordinate all of our districts, and it'll be a virtual discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much, and I hope y'all drive back safely this evening. I hate that you're
We
going to.
appreciate you guys waiting, and again, we are so sorry. Traffic was disastrous.
No,
Robert
not-
and I are both public school parents, so we really appreciate the opportunity to represent a client that's so important to us. So we are always grateful to meet with you guys and do the work that we do.
Well, thank y'all so much for coming.
Thanks.
Okay. Public forum is next on the agenda, and we do not have any public forum speakers this evening. So now we'll move to board forum. And Ms. Lee, do you have anything? Ms. Satterfield?
I don't think I have anything, but if I do, can I come back?
You can.
Thank
I'll
you.
check back with you.
Thank you.
Miss, sounded very mysterious. Miss Owen? Mr. Watson? Mr. McMillan? No? How about Miss Satterfield?
No.
Okay.
I feel like we haven't had it in such a long time. So.
I know. I guess I would just like to say, I love seeing, I mean, I've just seen on social media and stuff, schools trying to make things as normal as possible. Like some of the elementary schools doing, pajama days and things like that, trying to make school fun. I mean, it's all about learning, but it's also about making life as normal for kids as possible. And I think our principals and staff and teachers are just gone above board. I've seen a lot of the schools still trying to do their homecoming themes and that sort of stuff. And it's really very encouraging, really trying to keep the spirit of school alive in these kind of crazy times. Yes, Mr. McMillan?
Pardon me. I was thinking you were going to adjourn, and I just want to make a comment that, excuse me, in reference to what Mr. Thomas was talking about in the report, or virtual and in person. There's nothing that you pretty well covered it, and I agree with what you said. But I don't think that you mentioned, now if I missed it, you tell me, but another advantage of in person is, particularly in the middle to upper grades, it brings about a competitive nature that you just don't get from the other.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And I did not mention
Well,
that, but you're right.
I'm, like you said, we'll deal with any situation that the family wants to decide. But I would strongly encourage them to give serious consideration to in-person learning for a variety of reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Okay, that concludes our work session.